Welcome to the Postgame. This is the Michael Brooks Show. I'm Michael Brooks. Thanks to each and every one of you. We're going to break format a little bit to take a couple of minutes to talk with a friend from Colombia about the national strikes that just within the last day, President Duque has finally acknowledged. Strikes against austerity, strikes against cuts, strikes against privatization. Part of this broader wave we've been talking about across Latin America and the world. And joining us to do that is an organizer and leader in this movement, Luisa Ospina. She is a member of the opposition POLO party, which is a leftist opposition. She's also a trade unionist and executive of the Colombian Education Federation of Unions, I believe. Luisa, thank you so much for taking a couple of minutes to join us.
Hi, Michael. I'm glad to be with you.
Can you tell us why you and your comrades are striking, please?
Okay. Let's start by saying that Colombia is going through a social phenomenon that started on November 21st, and it began with as a purpose for central of workers, trade unions, organization of university students, and we were at the street to reject something that we have called big package of neoliberal policies that the current government wants to impose in our country. They are related to labor, social security, healthcare, pension, and peace process. You know, it is a very special topic in our country, and we are, as workers, working, in fact, to make the peace process something successful. But the government is not putting too much attention to this, and it is a very difficult situation for us. So we join this topic, peace, and the others demanding for workers, especially young workers, to say to the government, we reject the policies they want to impose.
What are your demands for workers and for the peace process in Colombia? And I'll just tell people the peace process in Colombia involves the FARC political movement, guerrillas. There was a peace process that was negotiated a couple of years ago and concluded by the former president of Colombia. It was actually rejected and slightly in a referendum amongst Colombian voters, but still went forward anyways. And the current very right-wing government of President Duque, who I believe is connected with the former President Uribe, who's an extreme right-wing leader. Colombia is definitely one of the kind of big security contractors of the United States in the region, and very militarized in terms of its policy. So I just wanted to tell people a little bit about that so they could know about the conflict. But what are your demands for labor rights against the neoliberal and for the peace process?
Okay, for about labor, we have from the Central of Workers, we have called that big package. In Spanish is paquetazo. It means a set of neoliberal policies and that get worse people's conditions related to social security. We demand to the government do not do the reform that wants to change the public pension administration system for a private system based on personal saves that people do while they are working. we know that pension needs the solidarity not only between generations, young and older people, but also a state solidarity in to work. So we asked the current government to stop the reform that in which he wants to replace the public system for just a private system. And we all know that in that way it is impossible to get a pension. It is impossible to get a dignity elder age.
Yes.
And that's related to labor. And also we are against some policies related to the payment for young people, young workers, and it's very incredible for us that a government that is always saying that is caring about young people now in the Congress is debating a reform to pay per hours. This is deep in informality jobs and to promote more difficult possibilities to access to a just work and a just payment. They consider that young people, it is a young between 18 to 25 years, employees can pay just 15% of a minimum wage. In this case, we say, okay, young people need be well paid. In fact, the minimum wage is not the necessary amount that a worker would have to live. Another demand that we have is about this process, and we as workers just demand that the agreement, the peace agreement, be implemented in the country. Now we have a government that doesn't want to fulfill to the agreements with the former guerrilla, and now they are killing them and they are putting them into danger. Yeah, well, that's something very, very worse for our country. We, as workers, want a place to live where we can work and progress, but it is not possible when you have paramilitarism, narco, and also guerrillas around. It is not possible to consider other problems in the country if we are just paying attention to peace and war. We consider that for the government it's a good business to keep that discussion about peace and war, because that's the way they can implement all the policies, because people just want to be secure.
Right.
And that's the methodology that the former, the Uribe's government, you mentioned him before, is the same position that Duque had now. And it is not a good system for Colombian. We just want the government fulfill the agreement, and also to do the same with some other organizations. They have signed some agreements, and they are not putting into action those agreements.
Luisa Ospina, I appreciate you so much telling us what's happening. We're going to continue to cover this more. We have all solidarity with you, and I really hope that you'll keep us in touch. And I also want to thank our friend who helped set this up so much. Luisa, thank you so much.
Thanks to you, Michael. Thanks a lot.
Take care. And I just want to say, I mean, this is really important because the security system in Colombia is such that she's absolutely right that political violence has continued and escalated. The FARC disarmed itself and has tried to move into electoral politics. And the right-wing paramilitaries and narco forces, which have always been connected with the Colombian government, Colombian military, are continuing paramilitary campaigns quite aggressively, including in city areas. The connection in Colombia between U.S. foreign policy in Colombia specifically, things like Plan Colombia, which have been devastating to Colombia's environment and also have meant tight relationships with the Colombian military, which are globally notorious for their human rights abuses. I mean, this is another comedy, right, in terms of the conversation about, say, a Venezuela relative to a Colombia. But it also has meant that Colombia has been, because they have never had, I mean, they have a liberal party. They've had some more sort of centrist-y tendencies. There's not, their left has been FARC guerrilla fighters, and they have had union organizers, which are and environmentalists who are murdered regularly. So they've been sort of the tip of the spear of aggressive neoliberalism, the drug war, and militarized foreign policy, and then kind of just re-exported back to us as like just a den of cartel heads, which is not only a false image, recently it's changed because there's like a Pablo Escobar tourism industry in Colombia is safer, but that actually had an extremely damaging effect on the country's GDP in terms of people's even perception of safety in those types of issues. So there's global risings everywhere. I agree with Pepe Escobar that in some respects in Latin America, it's so stark because neoliberalism itself is being confronted. But of course, I always say there's socialist and labor factions in Hong Kong. There's certainly serious labor and inequality unrest in Iran. But Colombia, because of the violence and because of the right-wing tilt and because of the tight security relationship with the United States, it's really, really significant. It's also very, very physically brave what people like Luisa are doing in leadership roles. So I'm really glad we did that. We're going to take a 1-minute break and call Ben Burgis, and we're going to do the debunk. Welcome back, Postgame. Joining us now is a man who wrote a great book called Give Them an Argument, Logic for the Left. He's a proprietor of a great Patreon, which I am a patron of. He's also a logic professor at Georgia State University System at Perimeter College. And he's also a regular contributor at The Jacobin and a weekly guest on The Debunk. I'm getting exhausted explaining all of this. He's also the inspiration behind this song by Moondug. I want to go to mockery really badly, so please go.
Okay.
You got to restrain me. Debunk all of it. Logical analysis. You're going to show us how to argue that. Go.
This is based on data from a bunch of different countries. There's abundant evidence that at this point that's bullshit. Breaking down these right-wing arguments and looking at how they're supposed to fit together.
Okay, break it down. Break it down. Break it down, Ben. Break it down. Ben, are you ready to break it down?
Absolutely.
By the way, you're sounding very good tonight. Back with the Skype connection.
Yes.
Let's play this clip, and I'm sure, and just a warning to everybody who gets triggered about criticism of the People's Republic of China. You're going to hear a little bit of it. This is Mike Bloomberg, who incidentally, there's another clip of him going around talking about how taxing poor people is good for them. Truly loathsome human being. Here's Michael Bloomberg. I believe this from earlier this year. Or I don't know the date on this.
I'm not sure when it's from. It was going around late last week and over the weekend, and I think that's when most people saw it. I'm not sure when the interview was recorded.
I think it might be pretty recent.
Might be pretty recent. All right. Here is Mike Bloomberg coming in on the
So
debunk.
the United States currently accounts for about 15% of global greenhouse gas emissions. Yes. China accounts for roughly 30% of greenhouse gas emissions. How do we, even if we get to net zero, how do you get China, India, and the other countries to be good partners?
China is doing a lot. Yes, they're still building a bunch of coal-fired power plants.
And they're still burning coal.
Yes, they are. But they are now moving plants away from the cities. The Communist Party wants to stay in power in China, and they listen to the public. When the public says, I can't breathe the air, Xi Jinping is not a dictator. He has to satisfy his constituents, or he's not going to survive.
He's not a dictator?
No, he has a constituency to answer to.
He doesn't have a vote. He doesn't have a democracy. He's not held
mean
accountable
he can
by voters.
If his advisors
gave him... Is the check on him just a revolution?
You're not going to have a revolution. No government survives without the will of the majority of its people.
There was a lot of interesting things to unpack there, but first I've got some ideas, but first do the general debunk, Ben, please.
Sure. So there is a germ of truth in the insane thing that he just said, which is something that David Hume pointed out. It's called Hume's paradox, which is roughly that, we see in his time as well as ours all over the world, large numbers of people submitting to domination by relatively small numbers of people. And it is, of course, true that if people no longer put up with that, it wouldn't happen. Right? This is the kind of underlying thought behind both Workers of the World Unite and We Are the 99%, right. That there are, that if the oppressed majority doesn't put up with its oppression anymore, it could end. So the question is, well, why doesn't it? And that's an incredibly complicated question. And if you really want to get into thinking about that, you can start thinking about Gramsci and hegemony and stuff like that. But there's also a very simple logical leap that the former mayor is engaged in here, which is something called the fallacy of division, which is where you say the whole thing has some property, therefore each individual part of it does. So, I can see this brick wall with my naked eye, so therefore I must be able to see all the molecules within it with my naked eye. That just obviously doesn't follow. Analogy.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
Doesn't follow. So just because, sure, it is very often true that even with governments that even with the most oppressive and authoritarian governments in the world, it is often true that majority of the population at any given time might see the government as legitimate, or at the very least as something that you can't do anything about, like a force of nature. This, by the way, this is something you get into very nicely in your forthcoming book, the way that the function of reactionaries is often to give people exactly that impression that, that social facts are like natural facts, that there's just, it's like complaining about the weather. What can you do about it? So it is true that people, oftentimes the majority of people, at least accept whatever government they're under, no matter how authoritarian, or think that it's legitimate, or at the very least that there's nothing can be done about it. But it doesn't follow from that the majority of the public approves of any individual policy decision it makes, even in governments way less authoritarian than the People's Republic of China, in its sort of current, post-Dengist, hyper-capitalist form.
Right.
Even governments way less authoritarian, way more democratic than China, government and corporate decision makers make decisions that most of the population hates all the time, just because they accept that the government is legitimate, or at least is there's nothing that can be done about it. That doesn't mean they approve of everything it does.
That's right. 100%. And I think the two tangents I just want to take a couple minutes with you on are, one, I think that we really do need to recognize that people like Mike Bloomberg view China, and actually I would say Singapore through China, as really what they want. And what he's talking about, and also I could see how they justify it too, because look, even again, as I said in the beginning of the show with the golden straitjacket, look, maybe they want it. We're still in, countries that have, traditional like kind of elections and parliamentary democracy. So we'll still give you, the ideal like of the 1990s, like an extraordinarily narrow corporate-owned choice, which is still obviously most of electoral politics today, except, now it's like, well, it's the discredited, exhausted corporate neoliberalism, or it's neo-fascist authoritarianism, or it's some type of resurgent, progressive social democracy, which of course they hate the most. But that point, more broadly, that yes, the China utilizes incredibly sophisticated methods of public opinion measurement, and they actually are very attentive to people's needs in certain areas. And of course, yes, the PRC has lifted a ton of people out of poverty.
No question.
And has achieved some great things. They also, and I like, I believe this is Pepe Escobar, who's much more, I think Pepe is, totally brilliant. That's why I have him on. I think he's more China sympathetic than I am, but he calls it neoliberalism with Chinese characteristics.
Right.
Right. And so, and you also, and then of course you do, you do have these like cultural cleansing programs of the Uyghurs and the Tibetans and so on. Look, this is just real. Let's just, be real, just as I'm not, just as there's plenty of people here who are xenophobic and conspiratorial and delusional. But the serious through line of Mike Bloomberg is not only is it an embarrassing double standard with a Bernie Sanders and a Maduro, and not only is all of the logical debunk that you just did absolutely correct, it's that this is a zone, this is Davos world that does see the management and delivery techniques of a lean, so narrow, it fits into every single nook and cranny of your life for your own good, mixed with hyper capitalism. This is what they see. This is their future. This is, they want this. This is another thing I said in my book. The choices between, Hungary station as neo-authoritarian, xenophobic reaction, Singapore, and then, Finland station as at least a symbol, of Lenin arriving, as at least a symbol of kind of actual human liberation.
Yeah, no, look, once you pose the question, it answers itself. Would Michael Bloomberg like something like the social credit system? Of course he would.
I'm shocked he didn't try to do it himself.
Yes.
What another great way of kicking poor people out of their homes. What other great way of terrorizing young men of color with policing. I mean, that, and listen to his, that's the difference, right? I mean, Giuliani or Trump, it's that raw racism, it's like, yeah, of course we put the police in certain fucking neighborhoods, right?
Right.
Bloomberg said, well, statistically.
Yeah, no, absolutely. And, also pay attention to the wording he uses, that, there are certain constituencies that they have to pay attention to. That's a very different claim than that they have to do what the majority of the people want.
Very different claim. And I believe, and one of those constituencies is him.
Right, exactly. Which is why,
as a global oligarch.
Yeah, which is why he identifies. I mean, even back when when China had had a system with much more socialist characteristics and less and less of the sort of capitalism with with sort of corporate neoliberal authoritarian characteristics. Even back in the 70s when Nixon visited China, he infamously said that, he really, to his advisors, that, he really admired the way that Mao was able to run such a large country while being able to consult so few people.
Right.
And of course, that's back when, when Chinese communism, was in full force. And now
when there actually was Chinese communism.
Yeah, when there actually was Chinese communism, that you didn't just have a system where they have Walmart, they produce half the stuff, the stuff at Walmart, where there's, a certain amount of state shepherding of economic planning on the highest levels. But in many ways, actually, the rate of exploitation is much higher, than it is in Western countries. And especially if you look at Hong Kong, literally, I mean, it's kind of funny, they use that word constituencies because much of the issue there is because of Beijing's maintenance of a system that was originally set up by the British, whereby they'll literally have these constituencies where you'll have it's when people used to make jokes about a certain congressman as the congressman from General Motors or whatever.
Yep.
In Hong Kong's legislative body, they'll literally have that, right? There'll be industry groups who get representatives in the governing body. And again, I think that I can't imagine that given Michael Bloomberg's worldview, this kind of socially liberal in certain respects, deeply paternalistic, but also deeply authoritarian, deeply neoliberal. I can't imagine Michael Bloomberg looking at that and thinking anything other than, yeah, okay.
I mean, we know. Everybody should look up, and in fact, read From Third World to First World by Lee Kuan Yew, and look at how Fareed Zakaria, look at how the Davos world treated him. By the way, he was by certain objective terms, I mean, he was an incredibly effective leader, right? Like if we're being on the objective realm of things, the guy arguably, I mean, he created a peripheral post-colonial island state and turned it into a global powerhouse in every sense of the word, and invented a new model of authoritarianism, right? Which has been exported to much larger countries than his own. And I make this point, I mean, this is another point with understanding the dynamic right now between capitalism and the rise of neo-authoritarian, fascist tendency globally, is that in the authoritarian capitalist model, there is still some of that. There is that recognition that in some ways we need to be liberal and open because we need the best person for the job. So if you need the best person for the job, there is that function of capitalism weeding out. In global capitalism, it's well, we can have all sorts of distasteful beliefs and awful policies, but we need the guy from Nigeria or the woman from Malaysia and someone from Dallas to hit those numbers, period. And then, the authoritarian impulse says, wait a second, the pie is shrinking. We're in global hypercapitalism. We better create apartheid to preserve my traditional privilege structure, right? And that's why, I'm going off here, but another comparison I see is, it used to be that India and China were both fetishized like 10, 15 years ago. And it's very interesting because the folks that fetishized India, it was all capitalism. It was all look at these giant countries emerging and embracing the market and global oligarchy. That was the real story. But those that put a little bit more of a premium on doing it in a pluralistic way talked about India, and those that cared less for that and just wanted efficiency talked about China and Singapore. Well, China and Singapore are still central examples, and India is at the forefront of the global fascist wave. So, that should probably be a lesson for people.
No, absolutely. And, to your point earlier, I think this is something that a lot of leftists have trouble wrapping their minds around, that because it's sort of easier, I think, for a lot of people if we see all the stuff that we don't like as aligned with each other all the time. Right. So it's like one big target. Right. And you're for it or you're against it. But of course, the reality is that obviously, as good leftists, we have all sorts of, we support, movements towards egalitarianism and all sorts of different realms, and, against traditional prejudices and bigotries. And the fact is that capitalism is sometimes, in some contexts, something that actually facilitates that.
Absolutely. Marx wrote that. Essentially, I'm paraphrasing, Marx, but yes, like we know this. No,
absolutely.
Yes.
Right.
Yes.
Yeah. Marx got that right. A lot of people who consider themselves, Marxists, might sort of like to think that it's all, that it's all one thing, right? That if you're sort of that, like we don't like austerity, we don't like bigotry against gay or trans people, so therefore, right, those must always line up with each other, but of course, often for its own reasons, the logic of markets will actually help break down the vestiges of reactionary and bigoted institutions. So the smarter critique of capitalism isn't, capitalism unambiguously, solely, always reinforces everything we don't like, because it doesn't. The smarter critique of capitalism is that we have, the way society changes and evolves is dictated by the needs of markets, which sometimes works out to get results that we want and very often works out to get results that we don't want, instead of being dictated by the democratically expressed needs of ordinary people.
Exactly. Final thing that I just want to hit, Matt, throw this up. Let's always hit this stat. It's perfectly appropriate. Matt, take it away.
Well, we just got some numbers here. I don't know if I can see the numbers from here, but there's an article.
Can you make this larger?
I can, but I don't know if we'll be able to find it. But
centrists, yeah, go ahead.
Centrists are the most hostile to democracy and most authoritarian as far as, supporting this sort of stuff.
And this was written in May of 2018 by David Adler, who's a former guest on this show. And we'll be back on again soon.
Oh, here we go.
Yeah, can you read that?
Yeah, let's see if I can.
Basically, yeah, these are really important numbers.
So if you look, the centrists are the most skeptical of democracy, is what the chart says. And you see who's supportive of democracy and who rates it highly. Center in many of the countries, not every single one of them, but are down on the prospect of democracy. So it's an interesting trend.
Yep. I think that's about it. Ben Burgis, as always, I appreciate you. Everybody, please buy Ben's great book. Everybody, check out Ben's great work, and we'll talk to you soon. Ben Burgis, thanks.
All right, thank you so much.
Bye. Speaking of which, let's do Bernie taking the billionaires to the woodshed. Bernie's surging, guys. Bernie's positioned to win 3 of the first 4 primary states, and maybe even do a strong second in South Carolina. Make calls, knock on doors, ignore the bullshit. We're going to talk about Warren and him and foreign policy in a minute. But look, if you're serious about these things, you got to do this. This is an unparalleled opportunity. Let's watch Bernie do his thing.
We live in a political system which is corrupt. Strong word. What does that mean? What do I mean when I say the current political system is corrupt? All right, that's one thing. It means that if any of you had a couple of $1 billion, you could announce, and I know many of you do, I'm sure this room is loaded with billionaires. It's usually the audience that we attract. Any one of you can announce your candidacy for president, and you would be taken seriously, even if you were the dumbest person on earth. Because you got $1 billion, you could buy it. And the media would cover you extensively because you can spend unlimited amounts of money buying TV ads.
That's it. And there was just a PBS special on the presidential election that did not focus on Bernie Sanders for one segment, 1 minute, 1 second, even though he has always been in the top 3 contenders. And Warren is dropping precipitously, and Bernie is growing, along with Mayor Pete. I don't know what the hell is wrong with people. And people also should be much more scared about the stability of Joe Biden. I've said from the beginning, outside of certain bubbles, he might have much more resiliency than we realize, even though obviously the idea of voting for Joe Biden is just, in my opinion, is just absolutely ludicrous. But that's the dynamic of the race. And the media blackout, the media war, the media bias against Bernie Sanders is going to continue 1,000%. And it's going to require you and us. I just want to talk really, well, actually, yeah, let's do this Lula stuff. So President Lula is free for a couple of weeks now. There was just a major meeting of the Workers' Party. He's been, collecting his life. There's still a freeze on his assets as part of this politically motivated persecution. I'd recommend the interview I did last week. Check it out. I did with our friends over in the Hill, Crystal and Sagar, on the global implications of Lula's release. And again, what's so significant is he's talking about the movements in Chile. He's talking about the demonstrations. He's talking about Uber. He's talking about temporary jobs. I mean, the charisma and strategic acumen are unparalleled, and he is the most successful president of the 21st century so far, if we're measuring it by delivering on the needs of human beings, like doing things like eliminating hunger in Brazil. Now, this obviously, the question now is democracy in Brazil. The judiciary has already been totally corrupted. This Lava Jato task force, backed undoubtedly by the DOJ, and as we've seen by the amazing reporting of Brazil Wire and then the incredible revelations by Glenn Greenwald and Victor Poggi and others in The Intercept, this is a political process, period. Now, an appeals court just gave Lula a new sentence. They confirmed the charges against him. They made no references of the Intercept leaks, which showed the complete corruption of Sergio Moro and the Lava Jato team and the political prosecution. And this is first. We'll go to Lula's lawyer. This is what he had to say. This is one of his attorneys. Of course, we've had Valeska Martins on this show. She's incredible. Please watch the interview we did. Here is Lula's other attorney. I believe he's also of the Martins family, explaining what happened in the circuit court ruling. And then there's another interesting image we'll get to.
É preciso lembrar que esse julgamento ele ocorre 19 dias após o ex-presidente Lula ter deixado a prisão, onde ele ficou por 580 dias ilegalmente detido. Então, é um recurso que foi analisado mais uma vez em tempo recorde. Nós obtivemos na presidência do tribunal uma certidão mostrando que no momento em que esta apelação julgada hoje. Ingressou neste tribunal, havia outros 1.941 recursos idênticos aguardando o julgamento. Então, a pergunta que tem que ser feita é: esses outros 1.941 recursos que estavam na frente da fila já foram julgados? É uma primeira pergunta que precisa ser feita. A outra questão que precisa ser colocada é que hoje nós vimos argumentos políticos sendo apresentados ao invés de argumentos jurídicos. Desde a fala do Ministério Público até os votos proferidos, todos eles recorreram a argumentos, a posições políticas. E a questão do direito ficou, evidentemente, desprezada.
So, and of course, what really remains to be seen with the legislature, with the judiciary, and certainly the military is democracy has been under siege in Brazil. Is it going to completely fall off? That is really the fundamental question of the Lula case as Bolsonaro continues to destroy the country and, of course, just get cucked by Trump, who announced tariffs on him, which I admit I found pretty funny. Now, someone pointed this out to me, and this is very interesting. Let's throw this tweet up. A friend of mine from Brazil. Why is it that a U.S. diplomat has visited and met with that appeals court that just did that sentencing on Lula twice? And my answer is I truly don't know, but I find it very odd that a guy named Willard Tenney Smith, who was formerly the director of narcotics affairs and law enforcement of the U.S. Embassy in Caracas in Venezuela, who, and this is from a report, lectured at Brigham Young University on Hugo Chavez's leftist politics and anti-American. Hugo Chavez, I'm quoting out from this article, Hugo Chavez has drawn the world's attention with leftist politics and anti-American rhetoric, but his country's role in narcotics trafficking is also drawing attention from the United States. A 15-year veteran of the U.S. Foreign Service, he's worked in Mexico, Peru, Guyana, and Jordan. What was he doing there? That's really my genuine question. And we know that the DOJ has backed Lava Jato from the beginning. We know that the Edward Snowden revelations, who he must be pardoned, by the way, showed that Petrobras, the Brazilian state oil company, was aggressively spied on by the NSA. And we also know that Lava Jato, in addition to waging political war on PT, making Lula a political prisoner for over a year, handing the presidency to a buffoon clown fascist, destroyed Petrobras, costing a huge amount of jobs and revenue. And we also know that some of the same techniques used in the Lula case by Lava Jato were exported across Latin America, including to Peru. So, makes you think. Makes you think. Let's do this. We celebrated again, guys. I would really get your tickets. We have an amazing time at this live show, and this was awesome to do the Lula Livre in Philly. The point is that Lula is an emblem of resistance and power and courage and dignity, and something that we really need to follow and emulate. So I want to tape this. We're going to send this to some people in Brazil, is all I'll say. But we're going to do a Lula Livre, finally Livre from the audience, please. Woo. Lula Livre, please, everybody. Lula Livre, Lula Livre, Lula Livre. Greetings from Philadelphia to Sao Paulo. Lula Livre. That was a great show. Lula Livre, Lula still Livre. All right, Michael, do you plan to cover the new elections of German SDP? They seem to move left and want to get better concessions from Merkel to continue the coalition or withdraw from the coalition. You guys have any idea about this? I know that they did elect 2 new leaders who are significantly to the left. I don't know what's next. Mike, but I will follow up on it. Michael, do we need to make a point more often that the working class paying for rich kids to go to school framing is total BS and completely backwards on the facts? What do you guys think? Do we need to be more aggressive on debunking the whole rich kids paying for working class kids paying for rich kids framing?
I don't know if we need to be more aggressive. I think just continue the effort because I think it's starting to work. Like if you look at, I think is it Liz Smith who's Buttigieg's communications director? If you look at her Twitter profile, they're all aboard that argument right now today. And I don't think it's actually going to work for them. I think anybody who is looking to Twitter for that to make up their mind on this is going to side with us on that. So you make the points that are obvious at this point, and don't sweat it too much. I think. I don't know. Are you guys concerned about that?
I think that
I'm concerned about it.
The more effective way that we need to be hitting it is to make it very clear that they're not doing this because they actually care about class warfare or coming after the rich. They're doing this because they know if they can make this a policy that only some groups of people enjoy, that it'll be easier for the right wing to work to dismantle it and to prevent it from coming into place in the first place. Universal programs are much better because the argument is simple. Anybody who wants to have more education should have the right to do that, and as a society we have the resources to offer that to everybody regardless of income, and we absolutely should be doing it. And anybody who's trying to equivocate or stand in the way or come up with more complicated plans is just doing that because they don't want that to be a reality.
It's divide and conquer, simply.
Totally. It is pure divide and conquer. And I do think for some people, pointing out analogous systems like libraries and roads are actually clarifying because that's how stupid it is. But you do need to give a visceral example. Devil's advocate. From Cardboard. How does critical support for Cuba based on alleviating poverty differ from neoliberal talking points like the ones from Steve Pinker? He's able to find his own facts that says everything is great. I mean,
there's a huge difference there because Steve Pinker is supporting regimes that do nothing to empower people. They do everything to keep people in the position that they're in. While the Cuban regime has not only lifted people out of poverty, but has actually incorporated so many people in the working class in that country into like a ruling government coalition for the first time.
Well, I think I just want to steal. I agree with you, obviously, but I think okay, so like Singapore has definitely cut poverty. Generically poverty. Well, here's what I would say to that. Comparable in the Caribbean and Latin American region in similar historical conditions, Cuba beats the types of regimes that Steve Pinker would either excuse or not know about or whatever. Cuba wins. So any analogous thing, that's why I talked about the Dominican Republic and Haiti earlier, but even like Jamaica, I mean, some of the numbers are like Cuba and Costa Rica, at least they used to be. And Costa Rica is a significantly wealthier country. So that's just, and then, it is a good devil's advocate argument in the sense that that's just like the kind of dweeby bullshit that distracts us from like the fundamental difference in a political project. And that's what David's talking about. It empowered people. It liberated people. It overthrew a dictatorship. It gave them a sense of purpose and possibility and ownership. Which, by the way, if you talk to people who spend time in Cuba, like they will acknowledge plenty of, of things that are not easy, but you can still talk to people who fought in the Sierra Madre. Like it matters. That's power. And the numbers are actually better.
The numbers are better, and also it's very important too. And the thing that Steven Pinker doesn't do is his numbers are silly.
His numbers are also
so really low.
That's right.
And also, there's no quality of life indicators there. 100% literacy in Cuba, unbelievable.
That's right. That's 100% right. I agree with that. All right, let's do the bad, and then two more pieces of sound, and then we will go. But let's start with the bad.
But it looks like it could be something that will be not good. Believe me, not good. No good, really bad for you. But it looks like it could be something that will be not good. Believe me, not good.
Hello.
I really dug the amoral Bernie bit earlier. We had some lunatic call into the majority. I shouldn't even say he's because he's a young kid. But hey, look, he's a libertarian. I don't know what to say.
He's on his journey.
He's on his journey. Hopefully, God's working on all of us. So, and he said, he's like, if you look at it through freedom principles, Bernie Sanders is the most immoral person running for president. And I was really into actually like the idea of Bernie just being like, oh yeah. And then he said, he was super Steve Pinker. He takes very rare examples of extreme human immiseration to make points about a system that have lifted so many from poverty. And so I was like, thinking of Bernie just being like, I know it's hard because things are going so great, but if we could just find one example of people dying without medical care, and then we could use it to squeeze money out of a billionaire, I could literally get an erection.
I'm like Jeffrey Epstein for higher education, publicly provided.
You know what really gets me off is the pure amorality of taking money from Michael Bloomberg and giving it so a kid can have an inhaler. It's fucking sick. And I love it. I mean, honestly, how libertarianism is the most incredible scam I have ever, like, that it is like I'm supposed to steal your house and like fuck your partner, and you should thank me and then offer to do free upgrades on the house. Like, it is the most, like, it is truly the most self-cucking thing I've ever seen in my life. Unless you're a billionaire.
If you knew the type of redistribution I think about behind closed doors, your skin would crawl.
Believe me, you don't want to know what gets me off. I want the Louvre to be free for everybody. That's how degenerate I am. All right, let's do it.
It's like Ilhan's like, oh, Bernie, behave.
Yeah. Bernie Sanders is a very frisky. I thought that I was totally decadent because I wanted the rich people to pay money for poor kids' educations. But Bernie wants even more. Believe me, Elizabeth Warren is no pervert. Bernie Sanders is the most immoral. All right, let's reset the bad. I just wanted to do that. That was funny.
But it looks like it could be something that will be not good. Believe me, not good. No good, really bad for you. But it looks like it could be something that will be not good. Believe me, not good.
Believe me, not good. The Tories and Boris Johnson. You'd have to be an absolute idiot to not vote against them and to not vote for Labor. Could you imagine? I mean, first of all, Jesus Christ, if Donald Trump's dad was alive, it would be helpful because the guy might just burn a cross or something. It would be, so transparent. But we do have the clown buffoon fascist prime minister's rich daddy is still around. And Boris Johnson's going to destroy the NHS. Boris Johnson is a racist and a xenophobe and a homophobe and a sexist and all of those things. And if you give the Tories a majority, you are going to literally hollow out and destroy the United Kingdom, whereas you actually have an opportunity to elect an incredibly effective and progressive Labour government if you could think with, some courage and intelligence and not just be a sheep of the corporate media in the UK. And yes, vote strategically if you need to. I don't think the Lib Dems are a strategic vote. Because I think they will, under this leadership, go into coalition with the Tories, and then they will all destroy everything. By the way, the Labour Party is adopted what the Lib Dems were demanding in terms of Brexit. So just keep those things in mind. Anybody that could draw a remote parallel in terms of level of danger between Jeremy Corbyn and Boris Johnson is either an oligarch or an idiot. Also, Jeremy Corbyn's dad is not this guy. This is Boris Johnson's dad. He was on a British morning show, and they read a tweet where somebody called his son dishonest, and this is how he responded.
Again, another point that was made in the comments there from viewers, somebody calling your son Pinocchio. I know that you responded to these allegations of lying.
That requires a degree of literacy, which I think the great British public doesn't necessarily have.
What do you mean by that?
I'm not going to get into that.
Well, that's quite a pejorative.
First of all, what a pussy. Get into it if you're gonna say it.
Yeah, just do it.
Like,
yeah.
I mean, at first I thought like that's kind of an interesting clip because it's in the genre of Tory elitism, just like they don't care. But
No.
he doesn't have the courage of his convictions.
You're
here,
absolutely right. Be a proper scumbag.
I know that you responded to these allegations
a
of
degree
lying
of
before.
literacy, which I think the great British public doesn't necessarily have. And
What do you mean by that?
I'm not going to get into that.
Well, that's quite a pejorative thing to say about the
They
great
couldn't
British
spell
public.
Pinocchio if they tried.
Why would you say that? Why do you?
What, can you spell Pinocchio?
Well, I
I
mean, whether I can or not, I don't think it's something to be critical of.
I go back to what I said before, and I was trying to say it in a humorous way. I think it is utterly absurd and wrong that you can read out on air a tweet coming in from one of your readers on air which calls the Prime Minister a liar. I think it is amazing you can do that.
And so then we end with a call for press censorship. What the fuck is wrong with you people? It's
amazing.
This is like the guy in Gosford Park.
It's unbelievable. It's like who needs Madame Tussauds wax museum when you have British people walking around Earth like this?
Oh my God.
He's Tory arrogance brought to life.
Oh my God, it's disgusting.
But it's
humiliate
not even like,
them on December 12th. Humiliate them.
This is it's not even like good Tory arrogance because it's like they couldn't spell Pinocchio if and he's gonna say like if it hit him in the face with its nose or something like that. I couldn't come up with anything clever, and it's like if they tried, like just grunting through that.
Just grunting. Pathetic. Bad form.
Also, they should have made him spell Pinocchio because that's a tough word to spell.
Yeah,
right off the top. Of your
I
head.
certainly can't spell Pinocchio.
There's two C's in there. If anybody gets put on the spot by a Tory.
On the other hand, and look, again, to be clear, you saw it. If you allow the Tories to get back into power, the NHS is on the chopping block. They will put the NHS in the hands of the Trump government and U.S. HMOs insurance companies, which might be the lowest specimens on earth. And it also matters here because after we elected Bernie Sanders, our own fight against the grotesque savagery of the American healthcare system and for destroying and entirely phasing out HMOs and insurance companies and having full universal health care is a political battle and a power battle. And believe me, you don't want them destroying a fresh market and getting new capital accumulation. Megan Day made this brilliant point on Twitter the other day. This is people in the UK. I believe this is Navarro Media that did this. Is this correct?
No, it's Joe Media, which I hadn't heard of, but
pardon me.
They got a lot of followers.
Well, Joe Media did this. I suspect people from both sides of the pond will be really shaking their heads.
10 grand for a baby.
Is there a price for that?
Yes.
Jeez, $100, $200?
$2.5 grand. Ambulance call out. How much do you think that costs?
Zero payment.
Zero payment?
Yeah, zero payment.
No. It costs $2,500.
For real?
Yeah.
Oh, okay, cool.
you look. An inhaler.
$100.
Yeah, you're pretty close. It's a bit more.
120.
250 to 350.
For an inhaler?
Yes.
Man, so if you're poor, you're dead.
I know that it's like public healthcare in the UK. In the US, fortunately, I'm able to get healthcare through my parents, their jobs, but like I carry an EpiPen, and I know that like the cost of that has just been rising. Mm-hmm. So like there's like very few companies that even compete, so it's sort of like a monopoly for the EpiPen. Even though like we have insurance, it costs my parents about a couple hundred, even with insurance.
So 2 EpiPens, how much do you reckon they are?
$80.
600.
$40.
I'm afraid not.
More?
More?
$100.
More.
150.
More.
250.
More.
Shut the fridge.
More.
£300. $600.
Yeah.
What? Why?
That's a very good question.
$600.
Yeah.
For me, it's more like just hives and shortness of...
I'll tell you what, you don't vote for labor, you're going to get a taste of that. Vote for labor.
All of the great innovation.
Oh, yeah. I mean, on the other hand, we have amazing innovation. I have this incredible company called Oscar that will barely cover emergency room visits, and dental care is like analogous to living in a Bond villain's lair in Thailand for 6 months. So don't worry about it. You get, well, look, let's be honest. Gulf shakes go to the Mayo Clinic, so it's all worth it. Yeah.
Yeah, I like that Casper.
Casper Care.
It inspires certain ideations that might be interesting to mental health professionals.
All right, two last requests, then we have one more final piece of sound we're going to end on. Can we get African Warlord Bernie? That's a really interesting character. How would that go? It's like, in my opinion, the UNITA rebels have run the... Wait, would you want to do a warlord?
Does he use child soldiers?
Yeah, it's just like... So in my opinion, if the child wants to work, then they should be able to work. Why should they not be soldiers too? Or it could that would actually just be Bernie, like in a different, like, it's kind of like, people say, why do we chop off people's hands in the diamond fields? Well, maybe if they weren't giving the diamonds to the other groups, they would have their hands. But that's just my opinion. And frankly, I don't think you'll hear about it fairly in the press.
I think maybe Ken Klippenstein did one of his 2 screenshot tweets where he tweets 2 news stories against each other. And one was the tens of thousands of kids that are detained in camps. And the other being like, I don't know how many kids Coney was responsible for, but a fraction of that.
Oh, yeah. Oh, yeah.
And it's interesting. It's an interesting perspective.
Oh, yeah. Definitely. I make Coney look like child's play. What a bizarre AstroTurf hegemonic fake human rights campaign that was. I don't even know.
Need more study on that, I think.
Yeah, I don't even know what that was about. That was so weird. All right, it's time for a throwback. We do these from time to time and hopefully more and more. This is Cornel West talking about the courage to love. And I don't think we should shy from these words, and I don't think we should shy from, whatever way you take it, the spiritual work.
Crucial, indispensable, bringing together the best of the legacy of Athens, the best of the legacy of Jerusalem, but in the New World context in which legacies of slavery, Jim Crow, police brutality, lynching, discrimination, redlining and bank loans, on and on and on. Always connecting one's vision about one's own freedom to the plight and predicament of others. Sisters of all colors, gay brothers, lesbian sisters, physically challenged brothers, indigenous brothers and sisters, so that they all constitute overlapping and intertwining traditions of struggle. But knowing that the courage to think critically and the courage to love, and I think we need to talk publicly about the courage to love. That's what I love about the best of the Black freedom movement. You see, it's very rare that you find progressives. These are my dear white brothers and sisters speaking publicly about love. You say, why is that? Well, it's a longer story we won't go into. But James Baldwin talked about love explicitly as the most difficult, dangerous, but also the most significant force in the world. Why? Because if you come from a people who have been so hated, love can become subversive and transformative, beginning by loving yourself. Mr. Louis Farrakhan the same way.
Yeah, we can pull it.
Much progress and evolution necessary.
Yeah. I don't have much to add to that. I just want people to reflect on that. And I do. That's one of many reasons, obviously, that I admire Cornel West so much. Is I do think that I wish there was a better word, but that spiritual dimension, that connection of the humility with yourself with the real bonds of empathy, because there has to be a actual corollary with the material efforts, or it is not going to happen. And Joshua Kahn Russell talks about that very clearly and sees it in frontline work. And that work is scary. It takes a huge amount. People find it in all sorts of different ways, sometimes in meditation, sometimes psychedelics, whatever. I don't care. And I don't have any recommendations. But I know that at least that language needs to be on the table. No one does it better than Cornel West that I see.
We get a lot of calls about people sort of anxious about how could I appeal to somebody not predisposed to agreeing with me.
Yes.
And instead of, navel gazing about it with yourself, just watch Cornel with Joe Rogan.
Yes.
And pick up a little bit of his techniques.
1,001%.
And I mean, not only is Cornel able to talk so much about the human spirit and love, the way that he's able to move from things that unite us, like, music and art, I think is also a very important language to be well versed in as well, because there is, politics is one way of looking at the world, but there's a lot of other experiences that people have that you can draw them toward, our ideas through.
Is you reminded of your Badu with that?
Well, absolutely. I mean, yeah. Again, in Praise of Love is a great little book by Ali Badu. He's talking a lot about the same idea. Love being something that is under assault in our system too, because it is so transformative for people. Even just like personal relationships, romantic relationships. We're seeing more and more that we're trying to be sold this way to have like love without the fall, love without that interruption in your life that sort of stops everything else that's going around you, and you just become completely passionate for someone else and a new being, and you bring that energy into your life, and that's not a very good thing for the shop floor, for example. It's not a very good thing. Your boss doesn't necessarily like that, and a very big worry that we might lose that and become what the neoliberal project has always been trying to make us become: individuals completely separate from any kind of social relations with one another. It's a battlefield that we actually like really do need to be talking about more in a spiritual, also in a political way too.
Definitely. And one last nugget to think on is that the original work of the language of emotional labor, as far as I understand, was documenting all of the spillover effect that people in service professions and other professions that were highly gendered, and where people took on an enormous amount of detritus and abuse and excess on an emotional level. I'm talking about right now. And so that was a smart analysis. But the way it's become so deployed and so universalized in ridiculous, comic, and unhealthy ways in relationships and in interaction with friendships, and to chronicle everything, you have to see that is a pure contradiction of what West and Badu are talking about. It is the marketization of even your most intimate space, which you actually should want to subvert politically and spiritually. All right, folks, we'll see you on Sunday. Thanks, everybody.